Hello and welcome to People Online. This is the second video in a series of presentations on competency-based HRM. The topic of today's presentation is competency mapping. It would cover the basic concepts related to competency mapping, the steps involved in a competency study, and a case study. The target audience for this series of presentations would be three groups. 1. Students of MBHR. 2. Industry practitioners who would like to implement competency based HRM. And industry practitioners who would like to get the best out of an existing model. Contents. In this video, we would be covering competency mapping concepts, designing competency studies, prerequisites for such studies, steps involved, and a case study. Competency mapping concepts. Competency mapping is the process of identifying job competencies for one or more specified positions. Competency model is usually a narrative description of job competencies for an identifiable group of people. In other words, it is a single set of competencies for a job or family of jobs. So when we carry out competency mapping for an identifiable group of people, for example, managers or salespersons or accountants, we create a competency model for the group. To create a competency model, a competency study needs to be carried out. Designing competency studies. A competency study tries to identify the competencies for the identifiable group by examining the factors that differentiate the job performance of those who are more successful as per predefined criterion or criteria vis-a-vis those who are less successful. Now let's take an example. The identifiable group could be salespersons, and the predefined criterion for those who are more successful could be more than 90% quota achievement for the last 2 years. And the predefined criterion for determining those who are less successful could be more than 70% but less than 90% quota achievement. Okay, and then this competency study would try to identify those competencies which the more successful group possess and which the less successful group do not have. Prerequisites. Before designing a competency study, it is imperative that one identifies the jobs that need to feature in this study. Needless to say, these got to be the more important jobs based on considerations of value that they create in meeting the strategic objectives of the company. Now, if this exercise is not carried out and the competency study tries to consider all jobs or roles in the firm, then the resources required to carry out the same would be prohibitive. Steps. There are 5 steps as elaborated below. A. Defining the criteria for effective performance. What would be construed as effective performance? B. Selecting a criterion sample. So there would be 2 samples. One sample consisting of people who meet the laid down criteria, called the exemplary group, and a second sample consisting of people who are just below the criterion, and they could be called the adequate group. C. Collecting data. The data may be collected using options like behavioral event interview, expert panel, employee survey, studying existing competency dictionaries, and job analysis. D. Analyzing the data and developing a competency model. The output from this step would be a competency code book listing the differentiating competencies with their definitions. The competencies are often put in clusters, particularly in cases where the number is large, and this actually helps in easy recall. Validating the model. Well, there are two approaches to validation. One is criterion related predictive validation. For assessing criterion validity, the competency scores for a sample of employees get compared with their criterion scores obtained from other sources in the future. So, if we are hiring people on the basis of assessment against a particular competency model, we get to know their competency scores, and we could compare those ratings with their appraisal ratings at the end of the first year, which is on the basis of their actual performance, and try and see if there is a correlation. And if there is a positive correlation, then obviously we are able to successfully validate. And the second approach is criterion related concurrent validation. For assessing criterion validity, the competency scores for a sample of employees get compared with the criterion scores obtained from other sources concurrently. Now, here the important difference is the word concurrently. So, for existing employees, well, as soon as we have a new competency model, we could do a 360-degree assessment and see who is where, and then try and compare with the appraisal ratings, the most recent appraisal rating, and see if the two are showing some kind of correlation. And if they do, then we once again say that the competency model is validated. A case study, drawing up a competency model. So objective of this study was to identify the generic competencies that enable middle level managers working in the technical functions in Indian software companies to succeed in their job roles. The approach. The basic approach was to select those competencies which were demonstrated more regularly by managers who were rated exemplary as compared to those who were rated average in terms of their managerial capability. So basically differentiating competencies. And the methodology entailed the following steps. Step 1, selecting the organizations. An exploratory survey of IT companies in Kolkata was conducted, and they were all selected on the basis of a specified set of criteria. The companies were approached to generate a pool of subjects who were willing to participate in this research project as interviewees, lend their time, and share information. Step 2, selection of the sample of high performers and average performers. 75 high performers and 75 average performers were identified by the respective HR process owners. Out of these, 31 exemplary performers and 21 average performers actually joined the survey. Step 3, conduct behavioral event interview. The superior and average performers were interviewed using BEI. Step 4, coding of the BEI transcripts. The BEI transcripts were coded by two coders using the list of critical attributes, which is, you could call it a competency dictionary, developed by Parikh and Rao in 1992. The coding process involved identification of competencies from the BEI transcripts and matching these with those described in the dictionary. The cases where the coders differed, consensus was arrived at through discussion. Step 5, analysis of coded data to identify differentiating competencies. Once the BEI transcripts were coded, the frequency of occurrence of each competency was determined. This was done by counting the number of times it was coded, subject to a maximum of 1 per story. Those amongst you who have prior exposure to BEI, you would be knowing that there are 6 stories in each interview. We would be taking up BEI in the next session. In the sense, the third video would be on BEI. The frequency data for each competency was segregated for exemplary and average performers. chi-square test at 5% level of significance was carried out. It was found that for 7 competencies, there was appreciable difference in the frequency of occurrence for these competencies between exemplary and average performers. Step 6. Validation of the competencies mapped. Subsequently, criterion-related concurrent validation was carried out. A 360-degree assessment was conducted on all members in a freshly drawn sample. The assessment covered all the 7 listed differentiating competencies for the respondents. The KRA scores for these employees were also available. The KRA scores and the 360-degree assessment scores were checked for any statistically significant correlation. It was found that the 360-degree assessment scores for 4 out of the 7 competencies showed a correlation with the KRA scores. These 4 competencies were then taken up as differentiating competencies to be adopted in the model. Findings. The table provides a list of the 4 differentiating competencies. Number 1, ability to motivate. The ability to elicit desire, enthusiasm, commitment, and effective behavior for goal achievement. 2, achievement motivation. The need to compete with some challenging standards of excellence. 3. Investment in subordinates. The inclination and ability to plan, train, create an environment, and provide facilities so that subordinates can realize their optimum potentials. And 4. Ownership or accountability. Displays a sense of personal responsibility in every action, even when unsuccessful. Summary. In this video, we have covered competency mapping concepts, designing competency studies, prerequisites for such studies, steps in competency studies, and a case study. Thank you for watching. If you found the video to be useful, do like, share, and subscribe. Press the bell icon to stay tuned in for the next in this series of 8 videos. Our next video is Behavioral Event Interview. Until then, goodbye.